Okay. Right. So we are back for the next part of the program. We heard already from 5 organizations involved in indexing. We'll have 3 more presentations from additional groups, again, involved in indexing and related to preprint review. And this is going to be then followed by another section of discussion. So reminder that if you have any questions, especially for those online that you would like to submit, continue to do so online through slido.com, and we'll monitor that when we open for comments and questions. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Gabe Stein, who's starting us on this part, talking about DocMaps. Thanks.
Thanks, Iratxe. Thanks so much. I promised Jessica I would not be 1 millisecond over time, so I'm going to need an extra couple of numerals on that clock. Okay, DocMaps. We've heard a lot about it. What is it? It's a community-endorsed framework for capturing valuable processes, valuable context about the processes used to create documents in a machine-readable way. What does that actually mean? We'll get there in a second. First, I want to say the process that we used to get here was really amazing. A lot of people who we've heard from over the last couple of days participated in this first technical committee, which was supported by HHMI and came out of a meeting here that was hosted in 2019. Jessica was huge in that, so thank you very much for doing that. Out of this technical committee, we came up with these 3 core principles of what we needed to represent review of preprints, but also in traditional journal processes. One was extensibility. It has to be able to support a huge variety of emerging types of review, and this was a slide that is already very old and doesn't include a lot of the stuff that's been developed here today, and I'm happy to say that DocMaps has been able to support a lot of the new developments that have come along. The second one was it had to be machine readable. We have to be able to allow folks like Melissa, who showed what EPMC is doing, to ingest these things easily to understand what's going on. And the third is that it has to enable discovery. It doesn't necessarily have to be discoverable of themselves, but it has to make discovery possible. And again, these are very old slides that predate SCIETY, which I think has fulfilled quite a bit of this role. Okay, so that's what came out of the technical committee is then this core concept that what we actually need to enable those 3 things are immutable assertions made by the producer of a document that describe the editorial context that can then be sent to a consumer. And the reason this immutability is important and the reason this sort of delineation between the producer and the consumer are important is that it allows us to do something that we've discussed at length today, which is to represent, I added new slides that didn't make it in. I was warned about that. But anyhow, it allows us to represent the same process in multiple ways, depending on how you're looking at it as a consumer. And so it allows us to effectively say, for my purposes, as eLife, for example, this is a reviewed preprint, but for my purposes as an aggregator, this is something that doesn't necessarily need to have a version of record. And so we can allow it to be very flexible. There were some nice outputs from this first technical committee that you can look at later when we send this around, I'm sure. And then after the technical committee, we convened a pilot working group with a bunch of folks from eLife and Cold Spring Harbor Labs and EMBO to actually just put this into practice and see how far we could get in a couple of months. And what we came up with in this working group is actually how to do what we've been talking about in the technical committee. And what we ended up figuring out, and this is mostly the work, honestly, of Chris Wilkinson, who's a developer at eLife, who helped us understand that everything we are trying to describe has already been described by people in the sort of semantic web and RDF universe. And there's a lot of ontologies that exist to describe the publishing process. And so what he said is, go to those ontologies, take what you need, leave the rest, and come up with something that's based on the work that other people have already done. And that's what we did. So a DocMap is very simple. It's actually just some metadata about who's providing this, the point of view of the person who created this document, and then a series of steps describing what happened to the document during this provider's process, whatever that was. And so what it looks like is actually this very human-readable bit of JSON. And you don't actually have to speak RDF or graph databases or anything to produce this. It can just be flat JSON. But if you do add that little bit of context, you can do what Tomas showed us and what Melissa showed us and create these nice timelines and graphs of it. So out of this pilot, we decided that our goal was going to be to take preprint reviews that were captured by Society from eLife and early evidence from EMBO, and use this format to capture them in bioRxiv. And we were able to do that in just about 6 months. And so that was really exciting. And so a lot of the reviews on that tab, the much maligned but still very exciting tab, are actually powered behind the scenes by this. And our next step is to try and support ecosystem development thanks to a new grant from CZI. And thank you very much for that, where we have funding to build out the SDK for this, to build out visualization tools, to build out, even to support, in some cases, integrations with other platforms. And so if you want to be part of this, if you're building a tool or if you're a review group that's trying to represent something that isn't captured by the discussions here today, or if you think the discussions here today need to be better captured by the ecosystem, our role is to sort of help you do that. And we now have the funding and the support to do that. So that's, I think, that's DocMaps. Thank you very much. Still 1 second to go.
Excellent. Brownie points for timekeeping. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gabe. And now we have 2 presentations from participants online. So next up, it's, sorry, do I have things right? I may have gone too far. Sorry, Martyn. Next up, we have Martyn Rittman from Crossref, and I'll be moving your slides. I'll try to do a better job than I just did, so just let me know when you want to advance. And I think you're muted, Martyn.
I'm hearing you, Martyn.
Wait, you can hear me. Okay. Yeah, it's good now.
Yes,
right?
Good. Go ahead.
Okay, good. That's 30 seconds of my time gone already. Anyway, so you're probably familiar with Crossref as the organization that you can register DOIs with, and the foundations of Crossref were to solve problems with citations, to make outputs findable and citable and reusable and so on. And along with the DOIs, we also collect a lot of metadata to describe what a research output is like. And then we're now putting forward this vision, which is kind of encapsulated by the diagram on the left here, something we call the research nexus, where you have research outputs and you can link them together and have relationships between things to describe actions that happen to them and links that are established between different outputs. So, the article is not the center of the world anymore. There's also, data sets and preprints and grants and reviews and author orchids and a whole host of other things as well. And of course, preprints and reviews fit right into this world and right into this vision. So you can register reviews with Crossref. And on the right here, there's some of the unique features that you can put in for reviews. So the kind of attributes, whether it's pre or post publication, the type of report it is, whether it's from, referees, editors, and so on. And if there's a recommendation, you can add that, the revision round, and so on. Can you move on to the next slide now? Thanks. So it's simple, right? We just need to link the preprint with the review using some kind of relationship has review in the metadata. So you just need to get a Crossref DOI for your preprint, get a Crossref DOI for your review, and deposit the relationship metadata. And there are a number of organizations doing that, and we have around 14,000 preprints with a review. That's about 2% of our total preprints. But I think if there's anything that we've learned from the last couple of days, it's that review and commentary happens in a wide variety of places. And some of these are kind of showcased on the right here. So if it's, within a journal editorial process, that's usually something we can capture if the reviews are open and if the publisher is registering DOIs for those reviews. bioRxiv, and we've a few times hypothesis annotations have been mentioned the past couple of days. We capture some of these via our event data service, which is the service where we look for mentions of Crossref DOIs outside of the Crossref world. There's, lots of organizations. I put peer community in on here, but, there's also Prelights and pre-review and others are reviewing preprints outside of journal platforms. Some of these are registering Crossref DOIs, some of them aren't, and there are some barriers, and that's something that we need to look into. It's really a question of resourcing, but I think there's much more that we can be doing there to work with these kind of platforms. Of course, not every preprint has a Crossref DOI either. Archive now has DOIs, but those are being registered with Datacite, which is a different registration agency, and we work very closely with Datacite. But this is one area where we don't currently collaborate with them as closely as we could do, and you can't actually register a Crossref review for a Datacite DOI. And again, it's a question of resourcing. We do need to do some verification that the DOI resolves to something, if it's linked to from a review. And of course, then there's comments on comment sections on preprint servers, social media, blog posts, and so on. And again, we capture some of this with event data, where we basically have crawlers that go out and look for mentions of DOIs in RSS feeds and things. But it's not as systematic as it could be. And I think if there's a message to kind of leave you with, it's that there is a mechanism for capturing peer reviews in Crossref metadata. But we are eager to work with platforms and partners to see how we can expand that and capture more of this conversation. 10 seconds to go, I think.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Martyn, for that very clear presentation. Right, and next we have the following talk from Matt Buis, who is at Datacite. So, Matt, go ahead.
Great, thanks. Just checking you can hear me.
Yes, everything is perfect.
Okay, thanks. You can jump right into the next slide. Thanks. Briefly, just to introduce myself, my name is Matt Buis. I'm the Executive Director of Datacite. Apologies, I couldn't be there in person, but glad to join you virtually this evening for me, this afternoon for you. Very briefly, just to sort of take a step back and just talk a bit about Datacite and really who we are as a community, not as an organization. And one thing that we are focused on is making sure that we are bringing together a community of communities. So recognizing that there's communities of practice that have common interests and bring those together with a common mission. And really what we're doing at Datacite is connecting research outputs and resources. And we're doing this across a number of different resource types, from data and preprints through to images and samples. And together working as a community around the creation and management of metadata records, which includes persistent identifiers, enhancing research workflows, so building in integrations into different services and platforms to streamline the use of open scholarly infrastructure, and enabling the discovery and reuse of research outputs and resources. Next slide, please. Specifically talking a bit about preprints and reviews. So obviously, as you heard from Martyn, really the simple piece is it's about registering a preprint DOI and the related metadata and connecting the reviews through relational metadata. Any identifier can be used. And so as an example, an archive preprint can have relational metadata with the review that is within Crossref or any identifier. And if it's not a DOI, we then have a related item type where you can actually put in additional metadata about that specific related item. But if it is a DOI, so as an example, a Crossref DOI, this makes it very simple because we can do content negotiation and our system will go and pull that metadata automatically into our database and pull that into the PID graph. And the PID graph you see in the bottom left of the screen is something that we developed through Project Freya about 2.5 years ago. And really this brings together the different pieces across the scholarly communications ecosystem and builds relationships between these different pieces. Next slide. What we then do with the PID graph and these relations that come in, and thinking back to what we're talking about here, is making sure that we can surface reviews as part of this scholarly record, and what I was talking about, bringing rigor to the scholarly record. It's really through leveraging this relational metadata and integrating this into workflows, and then looking at the downstream use cases. So looking at research assessment, post-award compliance, enhanced discovery, fair implementation, etc., and building that into different interfaces. We have Datacite Commons, which is a user interface that is openly available, and a lot of different functionality that's going to be coming into Datacite Commons over the next year, and that really leverages a lot of this metadata that we're talking about, this relational metadata, and demonstrates connections and addresses downstream use cases for the community. And so acknowledging also that there's a lot of work that we need to do in the space of preprints, particularly around reviews, both from a metadata schema perspective, but also functionality within our different tools and APIs. And we're working very closely and talking to Crossref about the future, and making sure that we collaborate effectively with the community. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Right, thank you so much to the 8 speakers who have provided updates on their projects and all their work in this space. I think for someone like me who is not an expert in the technical side of things necessarily, a highlight is the fact that we have so many tools available. Essentially, we are not necessarily starting from scratch. Some of the platforms, obviously, such as preprint review aggregators, are more dedicated specifically for preprints, but we have also heard from many organizations who are working on this linking of different outputs, and preprint reviews will be one type of output among others, and again, something that we can leverage in terms of the tools available to also increase the visibility and discoverability of preprint reviews. So we have now time for discussion for the next 40 minutes or so. I wanted to see if there was any initial reactions, comments to, again, any of the presentations, any queries for the speakers, or comments overall as to, I guess, how can these tools facilitate discoverability of preprint reviews? Are there any ways in which perhaps some of them can work together? Collaboration has been mentioned as part of the presentations as well. Or perhaps what are the needs? How can we make sure that there is as much progress as possible in this space? Any comments, questions? Yes, thank you. Clarice, please go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to say thank you to all the speakers. I'm discovering so many new platforms I never heard about before. Probably shame on me on that, but really it's a lot of effort that you guys are putting together to help us to discover preprint and also reviews. And on that, I was thinking, is there kind of some duplicate effort here? Like some of the platforms are probably gathering the same preprint or maybe the same reviews. And I was wondering, as a researcher, I want to read or post those reviews, how should I navigate around all of this? It seems a bit, for me, like that this is a bit everywhere. I don't know if this is a comment that is useful or not, but.
Thank you so much. I see Matt has the hand up, please.
Yeah, I thought I'd jump in. I mean, yes, it's technically possible, but generally we find that's not the case. There is a way to type the relationship in the metadata. Referencing things is identical to. Most commonly, we see that being used for different related identifiers. So as an example, a local identifier and a DOI. But I can say fairly confidently that you won't have duplicates of preprints and reviews across Datacite and Crossref as an example. We talk very closely to each other. We wouldn't have people registering with both of us. And there's ways that we could also detect that. And some of the things that we're talking about are around that as well.
Any other comments from perhaps any other platforms around this risk of duplication? I guess how can we have clarity wherever there are similar objects in different places? Yes, Thomas.
Well, I think it's obvious that there is large overlap between these platforms, and in part we do the same, but with different angles, with sometimes different goals. I think it's so early days in this field of reviewed preprint that it's actually quite a good sign, because we're quite many to jump on it and try to create and innovate and do stuff and build. Most of it will probably break and disappear when it reaches maturity, but I think it's a very good sort of intermediate phase of innovation, and it will pan out later. I think as we do that, if we keep the principle of decentralized and interoperability, we are going to gain at the end of the day, rather than trying to centralize very quickly, because superficially it's easier. But that's just my personal opinion.
I have to say, from a user perspective, I personally don't mind the redundancy. I don't think we have enough visibility of preprint reviews, so I'd rather land in different places and get the same signal, provided that the transparency is there in terms of when is the same object. I think Jessica is on the mic.
Yeah, hi, Jessica from ASAP Bio. We've been tracking a variety of different preprint review projects through Reimagine Review and other initiatives. And I think that some of them are intended to be trials, some of them are ephemeral, which I think leads to the question of preservation. Of course, this is an issue for preprints and for even journal articles as well. But I would love to hear from the perspective of peer review service providers and also those who might be indexing this content. I think that there's less of a tendency to associate open licenses with preprint review content. How does this impact the desire to preserve content, and what preservation plans are in place at the moment?
Thank you. Any reactions to Jessica's question? I saw Martyn had a hand up, so I don't know if it's related to this. Or...
No, I think it's an excellent question. I think licensing is very important. I was just going to kind of address the issue of duplication. It's something that came up in our preprint advisory group, because there is with, for example, journals offering preprint publication upon submission, there are more cases where the same preprint is being posted on duplicate platforms, and it's not very clear whose responsibility it is to check that. And there may be a role for Crossref. It's something we're very early days of looking into, but there may be a role for Crossref to at least highlight that these two items look like they may be the same preprint, or maybe different versions of the same preprint on the same platform, and at least link them together in the metadata, and someone can check that later.
Thanks, Martyn. I see Denis has the hand up. Denis.
Yeah, this was to answer Jessica's question. So in our case, we pay attention on the long-term preservation. So we put all the recommendation text on clocks for long-term preservation of the recommendation, and necessarily all the peer reviews associated with that.
Thank you so much. Any other reactions? Oh, yes, sorry. Thea, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is, again, one of the things about where the peer reviews sit. And when they sit with journals, they're often supplementary files. And whether they automatically have the same license as the articles they're with, and given that they actually have a different author, they should really be being relicensed. I don't think it's dealt with at all well at the moment.
Thank you. And Melis on the standing mic.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with those points. I think I was also just going to say that for us, we don't have immediate plans or even short to medium, long-term plans to actually index full text peer reviews. I think, for us at the moment, it's more about being the place where, or a place where they're gathered and you can find them, but not kind of indexing them as content, because I mean that's pretty complicated and like everything. But also, we're looking at DocMaps now. I mean, we're looking at the DOI infrastructure, but the thing that for us, DocMaps and the idea of us going to every single site to pull that information is not sustainable, but it's a place to start. And we're trying, this is our supporting open science, supporting these things, but we hope that it's going to land somewhere that becomes sustainable for us. But then also at the moment, if we try and push everything down one road, then I think we're going to stifle the innovation that's happening here. And so we have to kind of just see how it plays out.
Thank you so much. Any other thoughts or questions or reactions to the licenses side? And I think Melissa very nicely outlined the fact that there is a couple of approaches you can take, either host the reviews or try to provide those signals as to where different objects are associated with each other. Or again, Jessica's comment about the plans for preservation of these objects. Okay, hearing none. Is there any other items that may be worth adding to this discussion? Again, sorry, go ahead. Okay, we had the first flying box incident of the event. So we almost made
I played softball for a long time, I'm sure you can tell. I did. So preservation, I'm the librarian in the room, even though I don't have a cardigan on today. But I'm Katie Funk from the National Library of Medicine. Sorry about that. When we met in January 2020 to talk about kind of best practices for preprint servers, one of the things I think we did discuss at that point was preservation and kind of like clocks and locks and other ways. And that's been kind of in the back of my head is as we talk about linking to this content, will it be around long term? If the third-party platform goes away, do those reviews remain? And I don't know if anyone knows, but the people likely to know are in this room. Oh, God.
Yes, please.
Don't make me throw it.
Okay, this is a very naive question. Is archive.org not sufficient in this regard? I mean, they maintain an archive of the vast majority of the internet, but right? The reviews? Do they have their Internet Archive. Yeah, but I mean, if the reviews are posted on the internet, right, wouldn't they get archived? Capturing them? Yeah, I guess that's what I don't know. That's what I don't know, yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Anyone can add some clarification?
I think that they had a project to archive scientific content, and I don't know how active that is. I don't know if Amy Brand is but or others who have interacted with that are around. But yeah,
I can say a few
yeah.
Yeah, I can say a few words. I'm familiar with their plans. So they're currently they have a project that tries to collect, archive, and reconstruct metadata for a ton of mostly PDFs that they come across, on personal author websites and repositories all over the place, and trying to clean up and create a structured repository. And on top of that, they also have specific partnerships. As an example, we work with a platform called Protocols.io that supports biomedical protocols, and they have a dedicated partnership to index and store copies of their entries in the archive. My understanding, the way it currently works, is that anything that has a public URL and it gets at some point shared on our website triggers automatically a request to caching it in the Wayback Machine. But if that is not the case, I would strongly urge all the platform maintainers here to reach out to Mark Graham at the Wayback Machine to make sure that actually this caching is happening. If not, I'm sure they can set it up. It should not be a huge deal.
Thank you so much for adding that clarification. We have Richard on the line. Richard.
So I just wanted to sound a note of caution here. I mean, one of the things we should think about, we've talked about this spectrum of review type material, and we've obviously said that, a tweet distinct from, something that more resembles a formal peer review. And obviously you can delete tweets and there's issues around that. One of the things that came up and I think there are other people in the room or on this call who were in some of the very early discussions about early career researchers, in particular PhD students, beginning to post peer reviews on content, was the possibility that they might want some right to be forgotten. Very early in your career, if you're just learning about a peer review and you're posting something, is that something that you want up there in perpetuity? So the answer might be yes, right? The answer might be that, all this stuff should be, but I don't think we should assume that answer is yes, just because that's the decision that we make for the primary content. So I just wanted to put that out there, that there may be cases in which people don't want it there forever, and just because we do that for the primary article doesn't mean it should be.
Instagram peer review. Snapchat. Okay, there is a discussion about how the different types of peer review on social media. But I think Richard's point is an interesting one, because there's been also quite a bit of discussion as to, obviously we want preprints and other outputs to be available as permanent records, but many platforms have processes to take down those objects if there is a particular risk. And how do we define that? It may depend on the platform, but there are processes towards that. And I had not been part of discussions prior about how to approach this for preprint reviews. What would be the process? Is this something that is looked into as part of the processes, again, for preserving and hosting preprint reviews? Is there any? Yes, please, Katrina, if you can have a flying box. Okay, thank you.
It's not a metadata specific question. It's related to discovery, but and this may have been discussed at previous meetings, that the standard of production of preprints is incredibly variable, with some as PDFs, some as HTML, some as XML, but also the ability to version, things like being LaTeX compatible, having videos. Is there a way in which the production standards of preprints can also be standardized or create standards in much the same way that the version of record is for journal articles? And there's a huge variation in what journals actually produce at the end result. But it seems to me that if we want discoverability, we're going to need the highest end sort of production standards on preprints. And I think this also helps muddy the water in what's a version of record, because often the version of record is the all singing, all dancing XML version, etc., that journal publishers produce. There's no reason that sort of production standard cannot be applied to preprints and at relatively low cost. So I'm just wondering where that discussion is. But I don't know. For preprint servers, I suppose.
I guess by extension also to the platforms that are developing preprint reviews.
Yeah, the platforms developing preprints, there's no reason they shouldn't be the best production standards for preprints, because I think that also makes them less of a second-class citizen.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Yes, Richard on the line.
Well, I think I'd push back, Katrina, on that a little bit. I'm very conscious that we're in a rather privileged space in bioRxiv and medRxiv, and we can do things like generate full text XML and HTML, but it's very clear that there are lots of disciplines that can't. So I don't think it's necessarily as cheap. We may get there, but it's not as cheap as everybody would hope. If there was somebody from Archive right here, I think they would say in the short term, there's zero chance of them having full text JATS-ML for 2 million Archive preprints. Because of even at a low cost, you multiply by 2 million, it's still a pretty high number. We frequently hear from SociArchive and other preprint servers that they can't do the sorts of things that we do because there's a lot more money in the biomedical space. Meanwhile, I think if I was Google or Google Scholar, I would say, the indexing's a little bit better with full text XML, but they've done a pretty good job with PDF that are just author PDFs for archive for quite a long time. So, I mean, I can see that as an aspiration. I think it would feel a bit privileged to claim it an aspiration for the entire scientific community or the entire academic community even.
Yes, please, Katrina.
I'd just like to push back on that a bit, because when you look at the sort of cost of APCs and the cost of peer review and the relative cost of creating production standards, it is actually much more affordable. And as soon as you've got the XML, you've got much more opportunities for text and data mining and creating more equity in the system. And I think money could go into capacity building and the sort of building of the infrastructure of preprints, and you probably have a lot better long-term return on funders' investments for doing that. And I mean, at the moment, we have a system of journal publications, which is, as you say, there's some disciplines. I think there's some disciplines that are still producing print only. And, in this day and age, that's almost immoral for research articles. So I think it's where the priorities are and where the funding investment. Maybe this comes back to the session we're going to have after the break about business models for this, and where the money and the funding goes into how that infrastructure is supported more widely.
Thank you, Katrina. Martyn, please.
Yeah, I appreciate the kind of the sentiment of what Katrina's point. I would say that if there are extra resources knocking around for preprints, I would firstly put them into the kind of checks and ethical side of things, and education is of how to do that correctly. I think that's something that would have an impact. But if there was a relatively cheap perhaps open source system that authors could use by themselves to produce XML, then great. That would be a nice solution. But I think we want to think about how to do this at a low cost and scalable way, which probably links into the next session.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any other thoughts from other players again on how to approach this element of providing the best quality possible for these objects?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear from providers who are indexing or collecting preprint reviews the factors that have gone into your decision about which of the existing sources to take into account. Now, we certainly have a working definition from this meeting and the working groups, but I know that, for example, SCIED has focused on, my impression is that it focuses on groups rather than individuals. I'm curious to hear about what are the other dimensions that have proven to be important so far, and are these going to persist moving forward, or is there an opportunity for having a more consistent approach, or is that desirable in the first place?
Oh, sorry, I thought Damien made this. Yeah. Oh, no, I don't want to volunteer you. I didn't know if Damien wanted to comment on the site.
Yes, sir. It was more of a pre-review question than a site only. Was the question...
The question is about the basis for deciding which groups to include or which sources.
So the question was about the motivation or the rationale for choosing which groups or which activities to include, in particular in this case SCIED, but also applicable, the same question for other groups.
Yeah, we have been fairly agnostic to... we do assess them, with our team to see if we feel that they are sort of providing things, but we haven't actually got kind of formal criteria for it yet. It would be worth doing. In fact, we do have this grant from CZI, which is between us and pre-review to sort of start figuring that out, and that's why I thought it might be a question for Sam, because pre-review are definitely, trying to focus on smaller groups, perhaps journal clubs and individuals even. Society, it's perhaps slightly larger groups, and like how we differentiate you distinguish between them, we haven't decided yet, and I'm not sure it's just for us to decide, but we are. It's a good question.
Any other groups or platforms that would like to comment on, again, what their criteria was or what was the motivation? It often comes down to this thing as to how do we describe this review activity? Does it count for us? Does it fall inside or outside? Which I feel is often related to, what Damien was saying, in terms of a community understanding how are they going to operate and what was the level of trust, however we define trust as well. But Sam.
Yeah, the only thing I would add really is that we don't want to be the ones to decide who should have the opportunity to be involved in preprint peer review, and what we decide is a review. Like, we want the communities themselves to be empowered to make that decision, and we don't want to be the ones to make that decision for them. So that would be, I guess, where our stance is coming from.
I think that's a very valid point at the end of the day, and I agree with what Sam was saying. At the same time, I think when you are creating a particular platform and deciding what to include, you do need some structure or some framework to it to say, actually, do I include it? We had a lot of, again, it has come up before, this thing of a tweet is not the same as an in-depth structure review in the way that we interpret it in traditional format. So I guess that where that lie, you had to start somewhere, I guess, and then hopefully allow enough room for continuing to innovate and include different groups, again, according to varying standards, etc. Okay, any other thoughts or reactions on this? Otherwise, I also want to, I actually had a question that related a little bit about that as well. We were having a conversation at the break about the fact that even in the context of journals, there is not necessarily. Oh, sorry. Before I go into this, I don't know, Martyn, if you wanted to react to this, apologies.
Sorry, a late hand. It came up in one of the discussion groups yesterday as to what people sometimes ask, what should we register a DOI for, and what we would encourage DOIs to be registered for is probably a lot more kind of liberal and permissive than people might think. And we would be interested in DOIs for short comments and maybe even social media things, blog posts, posters, those kind of outputs, without necessarily thinking about does this have a quality aspect? Who said this? As long as it contributes to the debate and it contributes to the context around research, that's something that we think is worth assigning DOIs for. But it's not something that we have a very formal definition of, and maybe our communication from that side has been a little bit weak.
Thank you, Martyn. The item I was going to mention is we were having a discussion at the break around the fact that there's been some effort on at least the publisher side, on having a taxonomy of peer review that was very much journal process-centric, I would say. But I understand that this has now been taken up by NISO. And again, I don't know the details as to how broad or not they will go beyond journals, but whether this is something that is worth considering in the context of let's look a little bit to the future, recognizing that there will be different processes, that not everything needs to be in the context of a journal process. And is that something that would be useful for the platforms that are doing this work of indexing and linking objects? And if so, how would you like this evolving to help in your processes? Oh,
not about this issue.
Oh, okay. So, are there any comments about, taxonomy, or how to make sure that again we don't let this conversation about the taxonomy for peer review to be too narrow and focus on journals?
Okay, on that issue.
Oh,
I wasn't responding to the specific question, but Stefano Bertozzi, I was standing up because of the pre-review discussion, and this is sort of an issue that's been percolating through the last 2 days, is whether we're talking about the bar on bioRxiv and medRxiv, or how we classify reviews. It seems to me that there's another one that occurs to me that is different from the categories that we've talked about. So I think with respect to pre-review, the difference between pre-review and rapid reviews is that pre-review doesn't select the reviewers select themselves. And we operate much more like a journal where we have an editorial team that selects the reviewers. And I think that's an important distinction. What's typically associated with that distinction is the establishment of expertise that's relevant to the paper and establishment of a lack of conflict of interest. But there's nothing that says that we couldn't have the establishment of lack of conflict of interest happen ex post, right? You could have a situation where a platform like pre-review has a submission from a reviewer, and then whether it's manual or automated through machine learning, you could establish a lack of obvious conflict in terms of co-publishing or things of that sort. And then there's the third issue, which is, does this structurally meet our definition of what a review is, which is different from a comment or a tweet or whatever. And finally, there's the question of what is the quality of that review? And I think all of us have struggled with the last one. I think we even don't have a clear definition of what structurally, we have an idea, we have sort of 4 bullets on the screen of that a review should do these things, but we don't have a mechanism of sorting, saying that reviews come in and they sort into those 2 categories. And as was helpfully pointed out a minute ago, journals themselves get lots of reviews that wouldn't qualify as reviews by the way we define them. But I think that it's useful to think about those 4 things. The first is this invited or self-volunteered? The second is the expertise validation. The third is the conflict of interest validation. And the fourth is whether it meets the structure of what we define as a review. And then the fifth becomes quality in some additional terms that goes beyond the structure. And it might be useful for us to sort of deal with those separately, because I think the disambiguation, especially now with machine help, not the disambiguation, the lack of conflict of interest is something that we will hopefully shortly be able to automatically add to reviews.
Absolutely. And interesting that you mentioned several items. I wanted to add to this briefly. We did some work last year with actually several people who were here and others on developing a vocabulary to try to describe the processes of preprint review, which Thomas actually mentioned in his presentation, so the preprint review features. And interestingly, we cover a couple of the items you mentioned, so whether the process, and this was a description at process level, and we had a lot of discussions to whether we wanted to describe this as process level, what's the process behind those reviews that leads to those reviews versus describing the reviews themselves. And we came to the realization, again, that individual review level things get very complex and can be very subjective. But we did include the items in that vocabulary, in those features, as to whether the review is invited by somebody, so editor or like, and also the competing interest declaration. I agree with you, this is something that's becoming increasingly a standard in terms of transparency and should not be very difficult to hopefully resolve in the near future, even using machines. But the elements that you mentioned about expertise and structure becomes a little bit more complex, and obviously quality can have its own meeting at another time. But any other thoughts on, yes, sorry, Naomi.
Hi, Naomi, Invest in Open Infrastructure. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to build on that point, but also expand and maybe flip the conversation, because we've started talking a lot about categorization and taxonomies and trying to understand what something is. And it's like a top-down control mechanism. And I understand that that's important for trust and quality and people wanting to use the content. But we've got this opportunity to be bottom up and letting the value rise up, and we're innovating. And I think it's just premature in this space to be starting talking about dictionaries and definitions. And actually, review can mean different things to different people. And the author might want an expert methodologist to tell them they've done the right thing. A patient community might want other people to raise up that doesn't answer the questions we have for our medical condition. There's different things that can come from this conversation about a preprint. And I would really guard against getting structured and defined at this point, and just letting people be as open to experiment and see what value rises from it first.
So I guess let's try to get more of this produced and contributed first, and maybe learn from there and try to give a structure once we have critical mass, I guess. Let's not try to get too many hurdles in the way for entry and participation. And obviously we're going to learn much more when we have many of these.
Yeah, exactly. But we hear some basic functions that we need, which is citability. So DOIs and having Crossref and Datacite be able to like include preprint review, you're not making a value judgment, and that's really important. You are making it discoverable and citable, and at this stage, that's not premature. That's really important that people can actually be able to point to something that lives on the internet. But that's as far, I think, at the point of infrastructure that we're at right now, I think that's as far as we should go, like the simple functions, and let the activity happen, encourage people to adopt, and then see what rises up as a need and as a value.
Absolutely, and leverage the tools that we already have, absolutely. And something else that came up in the discussion we had this morning was in a different context, but around creating preprint reviews. But we actually had a bit of a conversation about that it would be valuable getting them into the ORCID profiles, and how, at the moment, ORCID, as what we heard from Tom, it incorporates reviews. But my understanding is that it requires, again, some certain, entity vouching for it. Essentially, if I were to post a review myself tomorrow, I have nobody saying I did a good job or whatever job I did. And then that wouldn't go in there. And we had a little bit of a conversation saying, why does this need to be necessarily a journal? We could have other entities. If you run, say, a training course on preprint reviews, and then you have your institution say, actually, this was done to a certain standard. Can you include that and give it visibility through ORCID? So again, can we find ways of just supporting that activity and include it into the tools that we have available already without creating hurdles? Yes, sorry, Iratxe, I see you have the hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just to speak to that point, one of the things I forgot to mention in my talk earlier this morning was that what we're doing at Arcadia on our pubs is actually, if someone gives us some, useful feedback on one of our publications, we're using the credit taxonomy, and there can be an extension of that taxonomy. And one of the sort of roles that we have is, providing critical, useful feedback. So if someone were to comment on one of our pubs that actually helped us improve the work and it changed the direction of the science or in some capacity, we actually put them directly on the pub with that designation using the credit taxonomy. So, I know that in the preprint space, this happens a lot. So we did this when we did with preprint journal clubs. Of course, people tend to put, people who gave useful comments in the acknowledgements or whatever. In our case, it just shows up like it shows up for anything else. Actually, our credit taxonomy, it's all just listed in alphabetical order at the bottom of the pub. But yeah, this idea that, the authors actually know what is useful comment, right? Like they are the fundamental experts. So I've heard some of the discussions in these breakout sessions about reviewing the review and things like that. But the authors know when they have a useful comment that actually improves their work, and there's ways that they can actually credit those people who are providing something useful.
Thank you so much, Iratxe. Right, I think we're coming to the end of the session, but we have a couple of minutes left if anybody has any further comments or, again, questions for service providers. Okay, I see no hands, unless I'm losing visibility with the progression of the program. Right, so if there is no other comments or questions, I think we can probably close this part of the discussion. We are going to be having a break here, but I wanted to mention before we go to the break that we are going to be coming back at 55 past. And please do stay on, particularly those online, because we are going to be coming back to a very important topic around sustainability and how we can find ways to, again, support the projects and platforms that are already running. How can we think about ways of scaling the activities and, again, find possible business models, hopefully, different ways of innovating with business models as well to support their activities. So we're going to have a panel discussion, again, at 55 past, so around 25 minutes from now. So please be back at 55 past. Thank you. Bueno.